What can a Century 21 agent do for you? They open your home, solve your problems and pat your dog. They provide the service of a butler and the savvy of a business tycoon. Century 21 agents. Smarter, bolder, faster.
Welcome back to Your Property Empire. Now, joining me on the show tonight is Michael Pallier, Principal of Sydney Sotheby's International Realty, and we've just been joined by Charles Tarbey, Chairman and owner of Century 21 Australasia. So we're talking about foreign buyers at the moment. Charles, do you know what the current restrictions are for foreign buyers in Australia? Just as a rough... We don't need the war and peace on it.
We're all starting to find them out now because they've become a little bit more obvious because of Mr Hockey. But certainly with foreign investors, if it's an established property, they have to get approval. And I think you were talking about one property just as I came in. Approval is required. When it comes to new homes or properties off the plan, that's where they really attacked it because the rules and regulations were almost non-existent, and so people would come in, other than the developers could only sell a certain percentage to overseas buyers. So there are restrictions, but they were never policed in any case, and I think that the incident with Joe Hockey bringing up the situation with that Chinese buyer was just probably a little bit of grandstanding because there are a lot more going on prior to that particular.
And that's what I was going to ask Michael, because do we think the legislation's actually working? Because Joe Hockey, the previous treasurer, obviously grabbed one of the properties in your backyard effectively and said at what, 20-odd million or something, no, you're a foreigner, you've actually got to sell that. Do you see, I mean, obviously you see a lot of foreign buyers, but do you see much actually happening around legislation?
Yes, people are very careful now. It takes a long time to get the approval through too. Once a person buys a property, I'm finding it used to take 3 weeks, now it can take 8 weeks. So I think the government are right onto it, and they're making sure that people comply.
And so because of what Joe Hockey did, that really kind of nutted things out and scared people.
All over China. It's my wife's Chinese. She's over there right now in Shanghai. And my wife said as soon as Joe Hockey got up in Parliament and embarrassed that big businessman, it went everywhere through China.
They double the size of the Foreign Investment Review Board workers from 2 to 4. You know, it was massive. Massive.
Yeah, so it's. I think it has done the job.
Now we'll show another one of these properties up, Rose Bay. Tell us about this one.
Oh yes, this home is in Bayview Hill Road in Rose Bay. It's a home we sold earlier this year. It was only on the market for a week. We found the buyer.
And that's the bedroom that I want to look out of. I mean, that view is absolutely fantastic.
The person who bought it is an Australian with an English husband. And the lady lives in London, and her criteria was she'd been looking for 12 months. They wanted to have the big view out of the main bedroom. So as soon as they walked into that house, they said, look, what's the deal? And we just worked out a deal and it was done. They paid $27,080,000 for that house. Now, that home, it was bought as a holiday house to use when they come over for their 2-week holiday every year.
It's unbelievable, isn't it? Yeah. Just a lazy 27 million.
And 80,000. 27 million. What was the 80 for?
Oh, the owner thought the 80 was a lucky number.
Oh,
so, and the buyer asked me, isn't 26,888 lucky? And I said, unfortunately, it's not.
I might try that out because that's pretty good. Yeah, okay. We'll throw a couple of 8s in, we're good.
An amazing story.
It was a great house. It was worth every cent of it.
Oh, look, I'll be happy. If it's a holiday house and they need someone to look after it for the feng shui, that it's not left empty, then I'll live around the corner.
Oh, right.
That'll be fine.
Good point. They've got a concierge that actually stays here and just looks after the house.
And he must be the happiest man alive when they're overseas.
He looks pretty happy, yeah. So watering the garden the other day, big smile on his face.
Charles, obviously you've got agencies all around the country, and a lot of your agencies will be dealing with the foreign buyers. Do you think it needs a different kind of agent? Because a lot of people that sell their property say, right, I want to sell it to a Chinese person thinking that they're going to get more money. Do they need those kind of networks?
Well, I find that really interesting because a lot of people, a lot of the agents will email me, say, can you connect me to somebody in Taiwan or in China or something of that nature. What they don't realise is that when I went to the conference in China that the Century 21 China held, they had a stand there trying to sell properties to Australian people. And it's exactly the same, whichever country you go to, they think they're going to sell it to a foreign buyer.
Because they assume the foreigners haven't got a clue and they pay other money.
They'll pay that little bit more and they'll buy it off the plan. They won't see the property, which does happen, but, you know, they're not silly. They don't just throw money away. So it's not quite that simple. And I think that you don't need a special agent in many cases. I think a special brand, when you attach Michael's background to real estate in Sydney, he knows it inside out, then you attach the fact that he is the owner of Sotheby's, which is also an international brand recognised as a prestige property sales organisation. Those two combinations are incredibly powerful. And obviously that's why Michael took that brand. He recognised that opportunity.
But also Century 21, I think it's the biggest brand in the world.
It's the most recognised real estate brand in the world now,
so
yeah.
anyone from China will know Century 21.
They know
so
it
as soon
instantly.
as they realise they're dealing with someone that they know the background, and yeah, so that it definitely helps.
And it's great to see two real estate agents from different brands supporting each other.
Well, actually, Chris, we come under the one parent, the US parent that started these two businesses.
Your brothers.
Well, I think I might be his father. I'm not sure how.
No, brothers.
Okay, brothers, fine.
Now, Michael, you operate in one of the most competitive markets in Australia, the Sydney's eastern suburbs. There's lots of agents out there would love to have your kind of properties. Does it take a different kind of agent to sell a $20 or $50 million property than it does a $500,000 or $1 million unit?
I think it does, because you've got to have the... I might not be as good at selling a $500,000 unit because I might not know the product as well. I might not know all of the sales in the area and all that kind of thing. And conversely, an agent selling $500,000 properties might not be able to give people comparison of, you know, what's sold around $40 million in Point Piper and what are the differences. And there's a lot of that kind of thing goes on. There's a lot of referral too. So a lot of the buyers are referred by a friend, and if you've got a good rapport, it makes it easier to get a deal done.
Yeah, I was going to say, your situation is such that you really have to have those strong relationships that go over a lifetime. When you talk about the person who bought Rolls Royces off you, most of the agents selling $500,000 or $600,000 properties will probably not see that person again unless they follow them through. Whereas with your situation, people would be walking their friends to you because of what you've done for them in the past. It's a very different sale.
And you've got to make sure that you do everything correctly to the letter of the law. Turn business away if you think it's not right for the person. Don't put people in the houses that are not the right houses for them and all that kind of thing. So.
Now, obviously, just as a final question, there's a lot of speculators saying, property prices, it's going to crash and things like that. Just coming back from Hong Kong, they're selling $100 million properties over there. Are we cheap when it comes from an international perspective? If 50 million could be cheap?
The way the currency has devalued, I think it's about 35% in the last year against the US dollar and against the pound. We're low also. So I have people telling me that they think it's actually very good value over here. The other thing to remember is we don't pay a yearly land tax on our principal residence, whereas, for example, if you buy a property in Beverly Hills in America, you could be paying, I think, around 1.8% per year of the purchase price. So if you bought something for $10 million, you have to pay $180,000 to the government every year to keep the property. So here it's a one-off payment, and then you don't have the taxes.
So a quick message here: if you think you're hard done by, Australia could be cheap at 50 million. Good to speak to you.
Good, yeah.
Charles, let's talk about the auction clearance rates.
Yeah, look, they're actually pretty steady again this week as opposed to last week, although they were slightly up over this time last year. So the 63.7% was the national clearance rate, the 63.5% last year. Sydney actually came in at 61.9%. We didn't quite dip under the 50s that people were talking about, and Melbourne at 69.3%. But again, the star is Canberra. Now, last week it was the highest. This week it's 78.2%. So 78.3%, my apologies. So Canberra is leading the country in auction clearance rates 2 weeks in a row now.
The Canberrans must be happy about that.
Yes, I do think your comment last week, Malcolm may have turned the tide for Canberra residents, Canberra property.
Now, Tom brought an interesting comment up before, is that obviously a lot of auction properties can sell in the days afterwards.
Yes, they do,
so when you're working on these numbers, is that literally up to the day of the auction, or is this up to effectively this morning?
It's actually
up
to this morning. That's where. So over the weekend, the papers might have reported 55 or 59 or whatever, but he's correct. There are 3 stages in auction: before, on the day and after, and a lot of people don't factor those 3 stages in.
Wonderful. Homes advertised for sale.
Increase this week again. This last week was a massive increase. This week was a plus 1.45% increase, but we're still down 2.2% over this time last year. So we have less stock than we had this time last year, but the activity is not quite the same. So I think it's balancing out very nicely. New Zealand went backwards, negative 4.7%, but where they need properties the most is in Auckland, and they actually had an increase in stock last week.
Again, so it's all about interpreting the data, isn't it, rather than just looking at that one single figure?
I do think so, yes.
And rent price movements?
Yeah, Sydney's great, up 0.86% up over this time last week, which was the best move. Queensland, Brisbane, 4.45 increase. Now, they are the 2 best ones, but here's the interesting stat. We're up plus 1.21% since the start of the year. So we've climbed. We're up there, whereas we were going backwards in rent figure. Now we're actually above, only slightly, where we were at the start of the year. So from an average perspective, right across the entire country and regions, we're actually up for rent. So there you are.
And just very quickly, the vacancy rates as well.
2.95 for Sydney, 3.59 for Melbourne, and 6.12 for wonderful Perth, 4.22 all up for the average clearance rate, vacancy rates for those three capital cities.
Now, just very quickly, Michael, we're talking about the foreign buyers here. Do you see, again, in the media, there's a lot of reputation that they're influencing the market and pushing prices up. Do you see that, or is that literally just at the top end, do you think?
I think we need the foreign buyers to help our market. I think it's very good for the brand new bill because it's creating employment, and you see a non-resident can buy a brand new apartment where they can't buy a pre-owned one. So that's really helping stimulate the economy. So I think it is an important part of it. And in the top end, definitely the overseas buyers are having a large impact. If we didn't have the overseas buyers, it wouldn't be nearly as many sales.
We'd be in trouble in Australia.
It doesn't affect the average Australian, which is good.
Yes.
Right, Michael Pallier from Sydney Sotheby's, thanks for joining us. It's great to see so many amazing properties that they got for sale.
Very nice to be here, thank you.
Charles Tarbey, good to see you as always, Century 21.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks for joining us at home as well. I hope this was a bit of a different show to see how the other half live. Anyway, until next week, I'm Chris Gray. Good night.
The information featured in this program is general in nature and therefore should not be relied upon. Guests appearing on the program may have commercial arrangements with some of the companies mentioned. Before making any investment, insurance or financial planning decisions, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you.